What happens when a cop thinks his badge is a golden ticket to do whatever he wants? On a sweltering summer night in Savannah, Georgia, Sergeant Nathan Brooks crossed paths with a woman who didn't just shatter his illusion of power. She brought his whole world crashing down. This isn't a story about a routine traffic stop. It's a clash between ego and justice, between a man who thought he was untouchable and a woman who lives by principle. 10:30 p.m. on a quiet riverfront road, the moonlight faintly glinting off the water. Major Cassandra Reynolds, a U.S. Army major with 18 years of service, was driving her gray government SUV back from Fort Stewart. She was tired but focused, soft jazz humming in the car. She wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving, wasn't doing anything to draw attention. But from a dark corner, Nathan Brooks's eyes locked onto her. Brooks, a patrol cop with 12 years on the force, sat in his cruiser, a cold coffee in hand. The night shift was dull, no action, no drama, until Cass's SUV rolled by. He didn't need a real reason. Dim taillight, he muttered, but deep down, it was just an excuse to flex his authority. His cruiser's lights flared, siren wailed, and before Cass knew what was happening, she was forced to pull over. Brooks stepped out, hand on his holster, voice cold as steel, license and registration. "Now," Casscom asked. "Officer, what did I do wrong?" But that question was like pouring gas on a fire. Brooks leaned closer, his flashlight blinding her. "Get out of the car." Now, Cass's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She knew one wrong move could turn this into a disaster. And then, in a moment taut as a bowstring, Brooks drew his gun, shouting, "Don't move." All because she reached for her documents. That's when Cass turned on her phone's camera. A small act, but one that would change everything. Could a single video take down a cop who thought he ruled the streets? Or would this story end in silence, like so many before? Stick around, because Cass Reynolds' journey isn't just a lawsuit. It's a wake-up call for anyone who thinks power can hide their mistakes. Savannah, Georgia, a summer night, the air thick like a whispered threat. The riverfront road was silent. Only the soft lapping of waves and the faint flicker of streetlights on the water. It was 10:30 p.m., the hour when the city seemed to slip into sleep, except for those lurking in the shadows. In her gray government SUV, Major Cassandra Reynolds, Cass to her friends, was driving home. At 40, a U.S. Army major overseeing logistics at Fort Stewart, less than 30 miles away, she was the kind of person who made you hold your breath when she entered a room. Not because she was loud, but because her calm was sharp as a blade. As a black woman, she'd long learned to face skeptical stares, turning them into fuel to prove herself. Tonight, she was tired. A long meeting at the base had drained her, but her mind stayed sharp. A gentle saxophone from an old jazz tune filled the car, blending with the rhythm of tires on pavement. She wasn't rushing, wasn't weaving, wasn't doing anything to draw eyes. But a few hundred yards away, in a dark corner, Sergeant Nathan Brooks had spotted her. Brooks, 38, was a Savannah Police Department patrol cop with 12 years behind his badge. He wasn't the kind of guy you'd want to meet on a quiet night. Tall with a low, growling voice, Brooks thrived on control, the kind his badge gave him. At the station, he was a legend, but not the good kind. Rookies whispered about how he could make you tremble with a glance, about complaints buried by the union and colleague silence. To Brooks, the streets were his kingdom, and he was king. Tonight, his shift dragged like a bad dream. No crashes, no calls, just a cold coffee and a phone screen blinking pointlessly. He sat in his cruiser, tucked behind a row of trees, eyes glued to the road. Then Cass's SUV passed by. Not too fast, not too slow, but enough to make Brooks smirk. Dim taillight. He mumbled, though he knew it was just an excuse. The truth? He was bored, and a government SUV with tinted windows was a chance to do something. Anything to remind the world he called the shots. His cruiser's lights blazed, siren slicing the night. Cass glanced at her rearview mirror, brow furrowing. She slowed, pulled over, hands steady on the wheel, posture textbook like her army training. She took a deep breath, bracing herself. She knew stops like this could go any direction, especially for a black woman on a deserted road. The cruiser's door slammed. Brooks approached, his tall frame casting a long shadow under the streetlights. His right hand rested on his holster, left holding a flashlight, its beam searing into Cass's face. "No greeting, no explanation. License and registration," he said, voice hard as rock. Cass kept her tone even. "Officer, may I know why I was stopped?" That question hit Brooks like a slap. He wasn't used to being questioned. His eyes narrowed, flashlight still blinding her. "You were driving erratically. Signs of intoxication. Documents." "Now," Cass frowned. Intoxication? She hadn't touched a drop of alcohol in a month. But she didn't argue. Not yet. She slowly reached for the glove box, pulling out her documents, and said clearly, "This is a government vehicle. I'm an Army officer stationed at Fort Stewart." Brooks didn't even glance at the papers. He smirked, a half smile dripping with contempt. "Army? Cute. But on this road, I'm the law. Get out of the car." Cass blinked. "I have a right to know the exact reason, officer." Her voice stayed calm, but there was an unmistakable steel in it. Brooks stepped closer, so close she could smell stale coffee on his breath. "I said get out. Right now." Cass's heart pounded, but she didn't let it show. She knew this script, knew one small mistake could turn this into a catastrophe. She breathed evenly, then slowly reached for her phone. "I'm going to record this interaction," she said, voice clear, and turned on the camera. Brooks froze, just for a second, but enough for her to see he hadn't expected that. "Record what?" he roared but didn't stop. "Get out, or I'll drag you out." And then, in a moment that froze the air, Brooks drew his gun, aiming it at her. "Don't move," he shouted, though Cass was only holding the documents he demanded. She raised her hand slowly, eyes locked on him. "I'm just following your orders," she said, voice steady, though her heart felt like it might explode. "Feel your pulse racing yet?" This wasn't just a traffic stop. This was a ticking bomb, and Cass Reynolds stood at ground zero. She didn't scream, didn't fight, but her eyes said it all. She wasn't prey. She stepped out of the SUV, posture straight, no hint of fear, though Brooks's gun still pointed at her. He ordered her to walk a straight line under the dim streetlights, as if she were some drunk stumbling through the night. Cass complied, each step perfect, not a single wobble. Brooks watched, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. This woman wasn't like anyone he'd stopped before, but his ego was too big to back down. He wrote a ticket. Reason? Unsafe driving. Cass took the paper, her gaze piercing through him. Not a word. She got back in her SUV, drove off, but in her mind, the battle had begun. Back at the station, Brooks laughed loudly, regaling colleagues in the break room. Some Army chick thought she was hot stuff. I put her in her place. Officer Jenna Miles, a younger colleague, frowned. "Who'd you stop?" Brooks shrugged, tossing his empty coffee cup in the trash. "Cassandra Reynolds. Works at Fort Stewart or something." Jenna stiffened. "Major Reynolds? You know who she is, right?" Brooks scoffed. "Who cares? She's just a driver." But Jenna didn't laugh. "She's not just an officer. She's a legend at Fort Stewart. Led convoys through war zones. Coordinated relief after hurricanes. She's got high-up connections, Nathan. You'd better watch your back." Brooks stopped chewing his chips, but then brushed it off. "Watch my back. For her? I'm a cop. She can't touch me." Oh, but he was wrong. The next morning, at her office in Fort Stewart, Cass sat at her computer, reviewing the video from her phone. Every second cut like a knife. The flashlight, the gun, Brooks's aggressive tone. She wasn't angry. No, Cass didn't waste energy on anger. She was focused. She thought of others, those without cameras, without rank, without a voice. The ones Brooks and his kind could trample without anyone knowing. She called her JAG lawyer, voice ice cold. "I need to file a complaint. Not just with the police department. I want the Inspector General's office involved." She sent the video, along with a detailed report, not a word wasted. When her aide, Sergeant Lopez, stepped in, he saw her eyes, the eyes of someone who'd faced war and survived. "You okay, Major?" he asked. Cass looked up. "I'll be fine." "You won't." Meanwhile, at the precinct, Brooks was still cocky. He tossed his body cam into the charging dock, scribbled a half-assed report, and went on with his shift like nothing happened. But Jenna's words echoed in his head. Major Reynolds. Legend. High-up connections. He shook it off, telling himself it was just a traffic stop. A ticket. She let it go, like everyone else. But Cass didn't let go. She never did. And when an envelope from the Chatham County Civil Court arrived for Brooks a few days later, the smirk on his face vanished. Inside was a notice. Major Cassandra Reynolds was suing him for violating her constitutional rights, unlawful detention, and abuse of power. He tore the envelope, laughed loudly, but it was hollow. "She's joking, right?" he muttered. But deep down he knew. That video, that look, that woman wouldn't let him off easy. The night in Savannah, Georgia, hung heavy, like an unspoken warning. Streetlights cast a dim glow on the riverfront road, where the soft lapping of waves whispered secrets no one wanted to hear. It was 10:30 p.m., and Major Cassandra Reynolds, Cass, kept her hands on the wheel of her gray government SUV, her sharp but weary eyes reflecting a long day at Fort Stewart. Gentle jazz hummed in the background, trying to soothe her mind. But then, a flash of red and blue erupted in her rearview mirror. A patrol car's siren tore through the silence. Cass took a deep breath, slowed down, and pulled over. She knew, on a deserted road like this, things could turn dangerous, especially for a black woman like her. The patrol car's door slammed, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the night. Sergeant Nathan Brooks stepped out, his tall frame casting a long shadow under the streetlights. His right hand rested on his holster, left holding a flashlight, its beam searing into Cass's face like it meant to burn her. "No griting, no courtesy. License and registration," he ordered, voice curt, ice cold. "Hurry up." Cass kept her hands on the wheel, her tone even but firm. "Officer, may I know why I was stopped?" That question was like a spark igniting a powder keg. Brooks wasn't used to being questioned. His eyes narrowed, flashlight still blinding her, as if trying to force her to submit. "You were driving erratically," he growled. "Signs of intoxication. Documents." Now, Cass's brow furrowed, her heart beating faster, but she didn't let it show. Intoxication? She hadn't touched alcohol in a month, and she knew her driving was flawless. "I'm not intoxicated," she replied, voice still calm. "This is a government vehicle. I'm an Army officer at Fort Stewart. I have a right to know the specific reason." Brooks smirked, a half-smile dripping with contempt. "Army? Good for you. But on this road, I'm the law." He stepped closer, so close Cass could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Get out of the car. I need to check your sobriety." Cass blinked, her patience tested. "I've complied," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "I have a right to know a valid reason." That was the breaking point. Brooks slammed his hand on the car door, the noise making Cass flinch, but she stayed still. "I said get out," he shouted, voice booming like thunder. Right now, Cass's heart pounded, but she knew, in moments like this, calm was her only weapon. She slowly reached for the glove box, pulling out her documents, but as she moved, Brooks suddenly roared, "Don't move." And then, in a moment that froze the air, Brooks drew his gun, its black barrel aimed straight at Cass's head. "I said don't move," he yelled, eyes wild, as if she were reaching for a weapon instead of papers. Cass froze, her heart seeming to stop, but she didn't tremble. She raised her hand slowly, eyes locked on him. "I'm just getting the documents," she said, voice clear, no trace of fear. "As you asked." Audience, feel the cold sweat down your spine yet? This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was a high-stakes chess game, where one wrong move could end it all. Cass knew it. She led convoys through war zones, faced deadly threats. But here on a quiet Savannah road, she had no army behind her, just herself and her iron discipline. Brooks breathed heavily, gun still aimed at her. But Cass's eyes, calm, unflinching, made him hesitate just for a second. He lowered the weapon, but offered no apology. "Hand over the documents," he snapped, as if trying to reclaim control. Cass passed them, but before he could take them, she said, voice cold as ice, "I'm activating my phone camera. This interaction is being recorded for both our safety." Brooks froze. A camera. He glanced at the phone on the passenger seat, its tiny red light blinking. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. But his ego was too big to back down. Record all you want, he growled. Get out. Now. Cass took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out, posture straight, no hint of fear. Under the streetlights, she stood, not like a suspect, but like a warrior. Brooks ordered her to walk a straight line, a pointless sobriety test. Cass complied, each step perfect, not a single stumble. She turned back, her gaze icy. I've done as you asked. Anything else? Brooks stared, and for the first time he felt something strange, like he'd just provoked something bigger than himself. But he wouldn't admit it. He scribbled a ticket, jotting down a few words, unsafe driving. He handed it to her, but Cass's look as she took it made him pause. No words, just a piercing stare, like she saw straight through his soul. Cass got back in her SUV, closed the door, and drove off. In the darkness, she gripped the wheel, her breath slightly shaky, but not from fear. She was angry, not for herself, but for all those without cameras, without rank, without a way to fight back against men like Brooks. She glanced at her phone, the video still saved. He's going to pay, she muttered, voice low but resolute. Meanwhile, Brooks returned to his cruiser, his heart beating faster than usual. He told himself it was just a traffic stop, a ticket, no big deal. But Cass's eyes, that video, haunted him. Back at the precinct, he laughed loudly, regaling colleagues in the break room. Ran into some army chick tonight. Thought she was somebody because she worked for the government. Questioned me. I showed her who's boss. But Officer Jenna Miles, a young cop with sharp eyes, didn't laugh. Who'd you stop? She asked, voice cautious. Cassandra Reynolds. Brooks replied, shrugging. Works at Fort Stewart or something. Jenna stiffened. Major Reynolds? You know who she is, right? Brooks smirked, tossing his empty coffee cup in the trash. Who cares? She's just a driver. But Jenna shook her head, her voice dropping. She's not just an officer, Nathan. She's a legend at Fort Stewart. Led convoys through war zones in Iraq. Coordinated hurricane relief in Florida. She's got a Bronze Star, high-up connections. You just stepped into deep trouble. Brooks stopped chewing his chips, but then brushed it off, trying to stay cocky. Trouble? With her? I'm a cop. She can't touch me. But as he spoke, his voice wavered, like part of him felt the cold wind of consequences approaching. He stood, tossed the chip bag in the trash, and left the break room, but Jenna's words echoed in his head. Major Reynolds. Legend. High-up connections. Audience, hear the alarm bells ringing yet? Brooks thought he was untouchable, but he just walked into a game he didn't know the rules to. While he tried to shrug off the truth, 30 miles away at Fort Stewart, Cass Reynolds was gearing up for the fight of her life. The next morning, early sunlight streamed through Cass's office window at the military base. She sat at her desk, a cold black coffee beside her, eyes glued to her laptop screen. The phone video played on repeat, each second like a knife to her mind. The blinding flashlight, the gun aimed at her head, Brooks's aggressive tone. She didn't flinch, didn't shudder, but her heart was heavy. Not from fear, but because she knew if she hadn't had a camera, a rank, or her iron discipline, this could have ended very differently. Sergeant Lopez, her aide, knocked and entered with a fresh orange juice. You okay, Major? He asked, voice full of concern. Cass looked up, her eyes sharp but calm. I'll be fine, she said, then paused, her voice lowering. But I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for those who don't have a voice. Lopez nodded, sensing the power in her words, a power that didn't need to shout to be heard. Cass picked up her phone, calling her JAG lawyer, Karen Walsh, a woman known for her razor-sharp handling of civil rights cases. Karen, Cass said, voice cold but determined, I have a video. I need to file a complaint. Not just with the Savannah PD. I want the Inspector General's office involved. And if needed, we'll take this to court. Karen, on the other end, paused for a second, then replied, send me the video. If what you're saying is true, this cop's going to pay. Cass sent the video, along with a detailed report, not a word wasted. She also sent a copy to her commanding officer, Colonel Harris, with a request for a formal investigation. Harris, a stern, quiet man, watched the video in silence. When it ended, he looked at Cass across his desk. "You sure you want to pursue this, Reynolds?" "It won't be easy." Cass nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not looking for easy, Colonel. I'm looking for justice." Meanwhile, at the precinct, Brooks went on with his shift like nothing happened. He wrote a half-assed report about the stop, jotting down a few lines. Suspected unsafe driving, sobriety check, issued ticket. He tossed it into the system, telling himself it was over. But as he walked down the hall, he caught Jenna's eyes. She said nothing, but her look seemed to say, "You messed up, and you'll find out soon." A few days later, a thin envelope from the Chatham County Civil Court landed on Brooks's desk. He tore it open, thinking it was routine paperwork. But as he read, the blood drained from his face. Major Cassandra Reynolds was suing him for violating her constitutional rights, unlawful detention, and abuse of power. He laughed loudly, but it was hollow, masking the panic rising inside. "She's joking, right?" he muttered, but his hands shook holding the paper. Audience, feel the ground shaking under Brooks's feet yet? He thought his badge was an unbreakable shield, but Cass Reynolds was turning it into a trap. But the story doesn't stop here, because in the shadows of the precinct, another secret was waiting to come to light. The next day, Jenna Miles quietly met with the precinct captain, Torres. She carried a thin folder, her eyes resolute. "Sir," she said, voice trembling but firm, "I need to talk about Brooks. The stop with Major Reynolds wasn't his first. I have evidence of prior complaints, 7 cases, all swept under the rug." Torres frowned, his voice low. "You know what you're doing, Miles?" Jenna nodded. "I know, but if we don't act, the whole precinct will pay the price." That secret was a ticking bomb, ready to explode. While Brooks stayed cocky, thinking the system would protect him like always, Cass prepared for a courtroom battle. She wasn't after fame or money. She wanted a precedent, a message that power can't hide mistakes, that a badge isn't a crown. The storm Major Cassandra Reynolds ignited in Savannah, Georgia, had reached its breaking point. In the days following the tense traffic stop, the air at the Savannah Police Department and Fort Stewart was thick like the calm before battle. Sergeant Nathan Brooks, his smug smile faded, now faced an envelope from the Chatham County Civil Court containing Cass's lawsuit, a razor-sharp accusation, violation of constitutional rights, unlawful detention, abuse of power. He tore it open, scoffed, his voice shaky but clinging to arrogance. "She doesn't stand a chance against me," he muttered, tossing the paper onto his desk. But deep down he knew that video, Cass's steely gaze, wouldn't let him rest. Meanwhile, at Fort Stewart, Cass prepared for trial like she once did for military operations. She sat with her lawyer, Karen Walsh, a sharp woman with short silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. In a small office, sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating a desk piled with documents. Cass reviewed the video one last time, each second a bullet ready to fire. "We don't need the media," she said, voice calm. "We need the truth." Walsh nodded, jotting notes swiftly. "This video is our weapon, Cass, but we'll use it right to expose not just Brooks, but the system that's been shielding him." Audience, feel your pulse racing yet? This isn't just a trial. It's an arena where truth clashes with power, and Cass Reynolds steps in like a warrior who never backs down. The trial day arrived, Savannah's sky gray, as if foreshadowing an eruption. The Chatham County Civil Court was packed. Not with reporters, not yet, but with soldiers from Fort Stewart, Cass's colleagues, and a few Savannah cops, sitting silently, eyes tense. Cass entered in full army uniform, her bronze star glinting on her chest, campaign ribbons from 2 Middle East deployments neatly aligned. She didn't rush, didn't bow her head, but walked with steady steps, like leading a convoy through a war zone. The jury, 12 people with varied expressions, couldn't take their eyes off her. Brooks was there at the defendant's table, in a stiff navy suit, the collar choking him. He tried to look confident, smirking as Cass entered, but his hands gripped the table's edge, knuckles white. His lawyer, James Carver, a middle-aged man with a smooth voice, whispered something to him. Brooks nodded, but his eyes betrayed unease. The trial began. Judge Laura Bennett, a woman with platinum hair and a gaze sharp as a blade, banged her gavel. "Let's proceed," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. Karen Walsh stood, addressing the jury, her voice clear, unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today not just for a traffic stop. We're here because a police officer abused his power, threatened an innocent woman, and thought his badge would protect him. Major Cassandra Reynolds isn't just a victim. She's a symbol of what we value: truth, justice, and courage." Then Walsh signaled. A large screen in the courtroom lit up. Cass's phone video began playing. Crisp visuals, clear audio. The flashlight blinding Cass, Brooks's growl, "Get out. Now!" His shout as he drew his gun, "Don't move." The room froze. One juror covered her mouth, another shook his head. Cass, stepping out, posture straight, acing the sobriety test, made Brooks's aggression starkly clear. Then Brooks's body cam played. His perspective even worse, his hand shaking as he aimed the gun, his voice dripping with contempt as he wrote the ticket. The courtroom air felt solid. Brooks bowed his head, unable to face the screen. Cass sat straight, eyes on the judge, unflinching. Walsh turned to her. "Major Reynolds, please tell the jury what happened that night." Cass stood, her voice calm but powerful, like briefing a colonel. "I was driving back from Fort Stewart, committing no violations. Sergeant Brooks stopped me, gave no reason. When I asked, he got aggressive, ordered me out of the car, and drew his gun despite my full compliance. I turned on my camera because I knew, without proof, the truth could be buried." Audience, feel the weight of her words? Each one was a hammer, smashing the wall of power Brooks had built. But the fight wasn't over. Now it was Brooks's lawyers' turn to strike back. James Carver stood, voice smooth but cutting. "Major Reynolds, with all due respect, didn't you challenge Sergeant Brooks's authority?" Cass looked straight at him, not blinking. "I asked for a lawful reason. That's not a challenge. It's my right." Carver smiled, digging deeper. "But you turned on your camera, didn't you? You were ready for a confrontation, weren't you?" Cass replied, voice icy, "I turned on my camera because I knew in moments like that, the truth needs protecting." Carver faltered, but he wasn't done. Then, in a sudden move, Walsh stood, holding a thin folder, her eyes like a predator's. "Your Honor, I request to present new evidence." Judge Bennett nodded. Walsh faced the jury, her voice booming like thunder. "These are internal documents from the Savannah Police Department, showing Sergeant Brooks faced 7 prior complaints for similar behavior: intimidation, abuse of power, unwarranted aggression. All were covered up by colleagues and the union." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. One juror's mouth dropped open. Brooks went pale, eyes wide as if stabbed. Carver shot up, shouting, "Objection! This evidence hasn't been verified." But Judge Bennett banged her gavel, voice sharp. "Objection overruled. Proceed, Ms. Walsh." Walsh turned to Brooks, her gaze piercing. "Sergeant Brooks, care to comment on these 7 complaints?" Brooks stammered, for the first time in his life, without an answer. The room was silent, only his heavy breathing audible. Cass sat still, but her eyes said it all. She wasn't here to destroy him. She was here to ensure he couldn't harm others just because of his badge. Audience, feel the room shaking? This is the moment truth crushes power. But will the jury side with Cass, or will the system shield Brooks again? Stay tuned, because the verdict is coming, and it'll change everything. The courtroom at Chatham County Civil Court, Savannah, Georgia, still echoed with the weight of the truth just laid bare. Major Cassandra Reynolds sat tall, her army uniform gleaming with medals, her gaze calm but razor sharp, like a warrior fresh from battle. Sergeant Nathan Brooks, once cocky with his badge, now bowed his head, his navy suit rumpled, hands gripping tight as if clinging to his vanished confidence. The revelation of 7 buried complaints had shattered his wall of power, leaving a suffocating silence in the room. The jury, 12 people with heavy eyes, had left to deliberate. Now was the moment of judgment, the moment that would decide not just Brooks's fate, but the message this story would send to the world. Judge Laura Bennett returned, her platinum hair glinting under the lights. She banged her gavel, the wood sound like a final slash. In the case of Reynolds versus Brooks, she began, voice low but clear, the jury unanimously fined for the plaintiff, Major Cassandra Reynolds. The room held its breath. Cass didn't move, but inside, an unseen weight lifted. Brooks froze, eyes wide, as if unable to believe what he heard. The judge continued. The court finds Sergeant Nathan Brooks violated Major Reynolds' constitutional rights through unlawful detention and abuse of power. He is ordered to pay $50,000 in damages. Furthermore, this case will be referred to the Department of Justice for further review, and the Savannah Police Department is required to conduct an internal review of its policies and officer conduct. The gavel struck again, sharp, final. Brooks bowed his head, hands covering his face, as if hiding from the stares around him. Cass gave a slight nod, no smile, no celebration. For her, this wasn't a personal victory. It was a precedent, a public mark on the wall of power, a reminder that a badge isn't an untouchable shield. Audience, feel the ground shift? This isn't just a verdict. It's a wake-up call, echoing from Savannah to every street in America. But the story doesn't end here, because what happened next truly shaped its meaning. As the trial ended, Brooks left the courthouse, Savannah's harsh sunlight burning him. Reporters were waiting, not many, but enough to rattle him. Cameras flashed, mics thrust forward, questions sharp as knives. Sergeant Brooks, any comment on the verdict? Do you regret pulling your gun on Major Reynolds? Brooks shielded his face with a folder, hurrying to his beat-up car, silent. But his eyes, dull, panicked, said it all. Rumors swirled in the Savannah PD. Brooks might be fired, or worse, face criminal charges if the DOJ stepped in. The badge, once his crown, was now a noose tightening around his neck. Cass, meanwhile, left the courthouse quietly. She didn't stop for the press, didn't raise a fist in triumph. She got in her car, drove back to Fort Stewart, her mind on what came next. In her office, Sergeant Lopez, her aide, stood and saluted. "Congratulations, Major," he said, voice proud. Cass met his eyes, her gaze softening. "No congratulations needed, Lopez. This is just the first step." Lopez nodded, understanding that for Cass, justice wasn't a destination, it was the path. Days later, in a small Fort Stewart auditorium, Cass stood before young soldiers, their fresh faces eager to learn. Sunlight through the windows lit her uniform, her bronze star gleaming like a reminder of her trials. She held the mic, voice low but resonant, filling the silent room. "What is power?" she asked, her gaze sweeping each face. "It's not something you hold. It's not a badge, a rank, or a gun. Power is how you use it, how you treat those who can't fight back." She paused, letting the question sink in. Then she told her story, no embellishment, no drama. She spoke of that Savannah night, the gun at her head, the video that saved her, and a trial where truth prevailed. "When you see wrong, don't stay silent," she said, voice sharp. "Act, but act with respect, with discipline. That's how you prove you're worthy of a uniform, of the trust placed in you." A young soldier raised his hand, voice trembling. "Major, how did you stay calm when things could have gone worse?" Cass smiled faintly, the first time that day. "Calm isn't fearless. Calm is choosing not to let fear control you. I learned that in Iraq, and I applied it in Savannah." The room fell silent, not empty silence, but the silence of deep understanding. Audience, feel the weight of her words? This isn't just a lesson for young soldiers. It's a lesson for all of us who've faced injustice and wondered if we should speak up. Cass's story spread, not just at Fort Stewart, but beyond. A week after the verdict, the Savannah PD announced a policy overhaul, emphasizing de-escalation in traffic stops. Brooks was suspended indefinitely, and an inside source revealed he faced an FBI probe for a pattern of power abuse. Some of his colleagues, once silent on complaints, began speaking out, spurred by Officer Jenna Miles, who'd bravely leaked internal documents. But the most shocking moment came one quiet morning when Cass received an unsigned handwritten letter. Inside a scrawled line, "I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll never forget this lesson." No signature, but Cass knew it was for Brooks. She didn't smile, didn't tear it up. She folded it, tucked it in a drawer, and moved on. For her, the letter wasn't an apology. It was proof that truth, however late, can change someone. This story leaves us with unforgettable life lessons. First, stay calm under pressure. Even when treated unjustly, control your emotions to make the right call, as Cass did facing that gun. Second, use technology wisely. A video can be your shield, your weapon for justice. Third, fight for others. Stand against injustice not just for yourself, but to protect the vulnerable, the voiceless. And finally, lead with integrity. True power doesn't come from titles or badges, but from how you treat others, from the courage to do right, even when no one's watching. Now, pause for a second and feel your heartbeat. Major Cassandra Reynolds' story isn't just a lawsuit in Savannah, Georgia. It's a roar for justice, echoing from quiet roads to every corner of America. She stood up, faced a gun and power, not for fame, but to protect those without a voice. But the question is, what will you do when you see injustice? Stay silent, or turn on the camera, speak up, and fight? Justice doesn't come on its own. It's forged by people like Cass, and maybe by you. Share your story in the comments now. Have you seen something that made your blood boil? Don't let it fade into the dark. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us to explore inspiring journeys, moments that change the world. Your action today could spark tomorrow's fire.